Have you ever wondered how much of your spiritual growth is influenced by your ego? In our quest to understand the self and the universe, we often encounter a complex phenomenon that deeply impacts our journey: the ego. The ego, as we commonly understand it, is not simply a manifestation of arrogance or pride. No, it's far more intricate than that. In reality, the ego is our constructed identity, the image we have of ourselves, the narrative we carry within us. It's the I, the me, the self that we believe we are. It's a unique creation, tailored by our experiences, beliefs, and perceptions. It's the lens through which we view the world, and it colors our interpretation of reality. But this lens can sometimes be cloudy, distorting our vision and skewing our perception. Now, you might be wondering, what role does the ego play in our lives? Well, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, it gives us a sense of individuality, differentiating us from others. On the other hand, it can create a sense of separation, disconnecting us from the world around us and the universe at large. This sense of separation is where the ego becomes a potential barrier to spiritual growth. As we journey towards higher consciousness and spiritual enlightenment, unity and interconnectedness become paramount. The ego, with its inherent tendency to isolate and differentiate, can hinder this process, blocking our path to ascension. However, the ego isn't necessarily a foe to be vanquished. In fact, it can serve as a valuable tool in our spiritual journey. By understanding and acknowledging the ego, we can uncover its influence on our thoughts, actions, and relationships. This self-awareness allows us to navigate the ego's complexities, enabling us to align more closely with our true selves. The ego, a paradoxical entity, can either be a stepping stone or a stumbling block to our spiritual journey. So the question remains, will you allow your ego to hinder your path, or will you harness its power to propel your spiritual growth? The choice, dear friends, is entirely in your hands. The ego isn't inherently bad, but its influence can cloud our judgment and distort our perception of reality. It's like a veil, subtly obscuring our vision, causing us to see the world not as it truly is, but as we believe it to be. Our ego is a compelling storyteller, weaving intricate tales about who we are, what we want, and how we should relate to the world around us. It's in these stories that the ego reveals its influence. It thrives on separation, comparison, and judgment, fostering a sense of individuality that can often lead us down the path of conflict and misunderstanding. Imagine an invisible line drawn in the sand. On one side is me, and on the other side is they. This is the ego's playground, where it thrives on the illusion of separation. It convinces us that we are unique, separate from each other, and this belief can lead us to compare ourselves with others, judge them, and even judge ourselves. In this way, the ego fuels division and discord, both within ourselves and in our relationships. The ego's influence extends beyond our thoughts into our actions. It can convince us to act out of fear, anger, or resentment, rather than love, compassion, and understanding. It can make us cling to our beliefs, our material possessions, and our status, mistaking these for our true identity. But these are transient. They are not who we truly are. Our relationships, too, bear the imprint of the ego's influence. How often do we enter into relationships seeking to fulfill a need or to validate our self-worth? The ego can make us see others not as they truly are, but as reflections of our own desires, fears, and insecurities. The ego's influence can be pervasive, and yet it is the understanding of this influence that can lead us to spiritual growth. By recognizing and acknowledging the ego's influence, we can begin to see through its illusions, align more closely with our true selves, and embark on a journey towards spiritual enlightenment. How does the ego infringe upon our spiritual growth, you may ask? Let's venture into this intriguing concept. The ego, a construct of our mind, can be likened to a veil, creating illusions that hinder our spiritual growth. One such illusion is separateness. The ego loves to divide, to categorize, to label. It constantly whispers in our ears, convincing us we are separate from others, from the world, and most tragically, from our authentic selves. This perceived division creates a chasm, distancing us from the oneness that underpins all existence and spirituality. Another illusion, a byproduct of this separateness, is the concept of superiority or inferiority. The ego is a relentless scorekeeper, always comparing, always judging. Are we better or worse than others? This continuous ranking system fosters a sense of pride or shame, both of which are distractions from our spiritual journey. And then there are the ego-driven desires and fears, the twins that often dictate our actions. These desires are not inherently bad. However, when they are driven by the ego, they become insatiable and can lead us astray from our spiritual path. The fears, on the other hand, keep us entrapped, preventing us from exploring the vastness of our spirituality and potential. Now let's ponder over a question. Does this mean that the ego is our enemy, an adversary to be vanquished? Not quite so. The ego is part of us, an element of our human experience. It's not about annihilating the ego, but understanding its nature, its tricks, and its illusions. We must learn to observe it without judgment, to recognize when it's steering the wheel and gently guide it to the back seat. While the ego can seem like a formidable foe, it is not insurmountable. The journey to spiritual growth is not about fighting battles, but about understanding, acceptance, and transformation. So let's continue this journey together, shedding light on the ego and unlocking the path to our higher consciousness. Transcending the ego doesn't mean annihilating it, but rather observing it without judgment. Now let's delve into the heart of the matter, transcending the ego. To transcend is to rise above or go beyond the normal limits, and in this context, we're talking about transcending the boundaries set by our egos. The first key to transcending the ego is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of paying attention to the present moment without judgment. It's about becoming aware of our thoughts, emotions, and sensations as they arise, without getting caught up in them. Next, we have meditation. It's an ancient practice that has been used for thousands of years to calm the mind and foster a deeper connection with the self. Meditation allows us to create a space between our thoughts and our reactions, giving us the opportunity to observe our egos at work. Self-reflection is another vital tool. It involves taking time to contemplate our thoughts, feelings, and actions, and to question the motives behind them. By doing so, we can begin to see the patterns of our ego and start to understand why it behaves the way it does. These practices all have one thing in common. They cultivate self-awareness. Self-awareness is the key to recognizing and understanding the influence of the ego. When we're aware, we can see our ego-driven thoughts and actions for what they are, just thoughts and actions, not the entirety of who we are. It's important to remember that this is not a one-time event, but a continuous process. The ego is persistent, and it will always find new ways to assert itself. But with mindfulness, meditation, and self-reflection, we can begin to see through the illusions of the ego and align more closely with our true selves. In doing so, we're not trying to destroy or suppress the ego. We're simply learning to observe it, to understand it, and to choose whether or not to act on its impulses. Transcending the ego is a journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. What lies beyond the ego, you may wonder? Imagine a vast, tranquil ocean, the surface of which holds a mirror to our most profound thoughts and desires. This is the realm beyond the ego, where self-awareness blossoms, and the path to spiritual enlightenment becomes luminous. Transcending the ego does not mean annihilating it completely. Instead, it's about recognizing its influence and choosing to rise above it. Once we move past the fog of ego, we begin to see ourselves with a clarity that's as invigorating as the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. This clarity illuminates our true self, the essence that remains when we shed the layers of ego-driven desires and fears. We begin to understand our innate worth, independent of external validations. And with this newfound self-awareness, we align ourselves with the universe's abundant energy. Imagine the law of attraction in its purest form. We're no longer manifesting from a place of fear or lack, but from a wellspring of love and abundance. Our desires don't stem from egoistic needs, but resonate with our soul's deepest purpose. Like a magnet, we draw experiences and relationships that harmonize with this purpose, enriching our journey through life. The journey beyond the ego is like stepping into a harmonious symphony where every note, every rhythm, is in perfect alignment with our core being. It's a state of unity, where we don't merely exist, but truly live, not just in harmony with ourselves, but also with the world around us. In this realm, our relationships deepen, our actions become purposeful, and our lives meaningful. We experience a profound sense of peace, a tranquility that stems from knowing who we truly are, independent of our ego's illusions. As we journey beyond the ego, we open ourselves up to a life of spiritual enlightenment and higher consciousness. This journey is not a destination, but a continual process of self-discovery and growth. And as we traverse this path, we learn to embrace our true selves and live in alignment with the universe's infinite wisdom.